All right. Thank you, everyone. This is Samir, and I think this is a time that we should get started to talk about the native advertising, which is our topic today. Just again wanted to thank each one of you to have taken out time and come over so that we can have this discussion. I'll in fact I'll try my best so that we ensure that we cover the topic from the rock bottom going upwards. Talking right about what is native advertising, what are the different forms of native advertising, what are I'll show you so many examples that would connect with the topic, and then further we talk about the challenges, the threats, the advantages, what kinds of trends do we see globally, all that. And just to make sure that you have everything that we're discussing on place, it'll be great if you can make notes so that if you have a question in the end, we have got a Q&A session for the same. So I believe you all have a head view of the presentation, and the voice is clear enough. So here we go. And here's what we're talking about today. So we are doing an overview of the native. Then we're going to talk about how different publishers monetize from the native content. We'll talk a little bit about what's the difference in between the regular banner ads, which have been ever since in so many years, and native, which is basically taking up as a trend right now. Not forgetting to say that we're not going to restrict our experience only to the desktop world, but we're going to go further, talk about mobile, we're going to talk about tablet, how do native ads affect the experience of the user. Performance tracking, of course, that is something which is very important, which will tell you, what is the impact of a native ad and how do you really go about measuring it, what are the, the various metrics which are used in tracking the native ads. And all that's when. So then, of course, like I mentioned, advent, different challenges, threats, and advantages. But before I begin, let me just briefly, introduce myself to you folks. My name is Samir, and I have mostly been working in the technology and the ad market field. At this time, I'm taking care of the ad sales and the ad management for Manorama Online, which essentially happens to be one of the rockstar publications from down south. Talk about interest. I think as we go further into the topic, we could always elaborate. So that's mostly about me, and I'll try and make it as interesting. So let's straight head to defining what is native advertising. And like I said, guys, I'm going to talk as if none of us know anything about native advertising, and we are all beginners. So I think native advertising, I kind of like this definition, which I picked up from the internet. It says, it's a form of a paid media. We all know that, it's paid, and the experience is such that it's camouflaged with the content of a publisher or a content generator. So typically, I would say native would comprise of two essential parts, the form and the function. So when I say form, what essentially we mean is, the ads which, when we say native, by the word itself, native means something that resides within. Like, for example, I'm a native of India, you may be a native of a different country. So we have certain traits here which very much follow our geographical location and our behavior. So native ads basically, the visual design and the content and the look and feel of these ads, they should marry the environment of the content generator or the publisher, And then besides, what essentially happening is the form, you're matching it with the function. So there should be absolute consistency when you talk about the user's experience. It should not be bizarre. Let me give you an example. Let's say if you were looking at, or if you were reading a content which was about health, how do you keep your heart healthy and so on and so forth. And then suddenly I bring up an ad which talks about the efficiency of a car, or let's say the features of a car. It's not really well matched. So if I'm reading a content which is related to health, which is talking about how do you keep your heart healthy, I think there could always be an ad which is like a Fitbit ad, number of devices ad. It tells you about how many steps do you walk, stuff like that, right? So it's imperative that we are matching the form with the function, and everything should look seamless. So that's the beauty of native. So for a lot of our users who are not pro ad people, who do not belong to this industry, believe me, they don't even see native advertising as a part of advertising. They see it as a content, as a real content generated, which they are reading through the publisher or through the content generator. Now, guys, I'm going to move a step further after defining it. I'm going to show you the next slide, which talks about, in the next slide, 4 slides, I'm going to talk about what are the different kinds of native ads. How does the publisher monetize these ads, okay? And how do we go about measuring the success of these ads? So if you were a marketer and if you were exploring, native advertising, I think one of the most predominant form of native advertising is the in-feed. So essentially, if you just read through what it talks about, an in-feed is usually a content which is either written in partnership with the publisher, or it's purely written under the publisher guidelines, which talks not maybe directly about a particular brand, but it's going to talk about. So it's more like a thought leadership kind of a content. It kind of builds up interaction, and it also lifts the brand. And essentially, the best thing that an in-feed native ad could do for you is that the buyer, who's the advertiser, he knows exactly where the content is going to be placed, and then from there he can check what kind of interaction in terms of views, clicks, and so on and so forth is happening for that particular ad. Take a look at the ads on the left. I hope you're able to see the screen properly. So you see various ads, talking about different brands. These are either sponsored, or these are ads which fall under the in-feed category. The other thing you could see, the second form of ad, which is quite predominant, is a LinkedIn feed. The difference is that it's a LinkedIn feed is more of a promotional ad. And these, when the user goes and clicks onto a promotional ad, it's taking the user off the site. So it takes you onto a landing page of the advertiser, and it essentially talks about either a brand, what does the brand do? Is there a particular product they're talking about? And again, the good thing about LinkedIn is that it is sold with a guaranteed placement. So if an advertiser is placing money onto buying a LinkedIn feed ad, which is a native ad, he's sure about where his ad is going to be placed, how does it look, and of course, this ad is being measured by CTR, which I'm sure a lot of you know, but I'm just defining it's the click-through rate. So if a user is looking at that particular ad, it's called an impression, whereas when the user goes and clicks on it, it's called a click. And when you divide the number of clicks by the impressions, you arrive at something called as click-through rate. So, I mean, that's pretty simple to calculate, but I think it's always good to define it. So now we just talked about the in-feed and the LinkedIn feed ads. I'm going to move into the next category, which I'm sure a lot of you, while searching on the internet, would have seen. These are called search and promoted listing ads. So essentially, you must have seen on the search environment, you going and looking out for, let's say, buying a watch online. And so essentially on the top left-hand side, what you see is the organic listings. In this example, you see that gray area, which is right above the organic listings. These are called the search and promoted listings. And the interesting part about the promoted listings is that, again, it has been sold, as you can read, it's sold with guaranteed placement. You either get a 1, 2, or 3 placement, and obviously, the rate of or the cost of your promoted listings is dependent on what kind of positions do you get on the search results, right? So, I mean, it's so the difference is that when if I go a step back and show you the in-feed natives, this is happening on the publisher website environment where you're reading content, whereas the search is happening when you're searching randomly for a particular product, or let's say a service or anything at all. So here's the difference, right? The previous one is on the publisher's environment. The second one is on the search environment. The experience being that there's a high probability, and a lot of the users, they don't basically tell the difference in between a native ad and organic search result. So there is a high probability that they end up clicking on the first result that they see. And in this example, you can see it is a native advertising, right? So it's mostly, it's guaranteed placement, and the ease of it is that it is measured on conversion metrics, such as how many sales happened, how many, so sales is the last thing, how many clicks happened, how many people filled up a form, or how many finally purchased a particular product. It works well with, more of a retail kind of an environment. All right, guys, hope it's selling well. So I'm going to move into the next slide now, which essentially talks about promoted listings. It's pretty much similar to what we saw in the previous slide. So promoted is something is you go out to buy a bag, and then you define what kind of a bag. Are you buying it for the office? Are you buying it for a short travel or a long travel? Depending on that, the search engine gives you certain results. And typically what happens is that these are all hyper-contextually targeted ads in which they're very specific on what the user is trying to look out for. And then they throw ads with relevant content. So I was looking out for a bag, and I defined my search on what's going to be the pricing. The native promoted listings are only specifically will come out and show those pricing range bags, so that it also doesn't disturb the environment of the e-commerce website, and then I'm able to see the ad in the same format, right? So there's a high probability that the user goes and kind of clicks on it. So that's promoted listings for you guys, and now we could always talk about. So yeah, I mean there's a format where you'll see native ads being labeled, or let's say a disclosure, because under the rules of the governing authorities, it is important that you label these ads so that you're not misguiding the user and telling him that this is our own content, but it is a ad content. So you might see links like you might like. I'm sure each one of you have seen that elsewhere from around the web, and then recommended for you. Now I specifically want to talk about recommended for you. It's something which is closely connected onto retargeting, in which if you've done a particular search. Now let's say if I was looking at going out for a holiday to Australia, I would have done a certain amount of research about that, and I might have come across websites like a lot of the travel websites like Expedia, iZooto, and so on and so forth. Now what it does is, so there's a great deal of retargeting which happens here, or remarketing, and automatically when you log into some other website, you will start seeing these ads because it's your behavior. You've been searching for a particular service, or let's say a product. So, but yeah, again, it's labeled clearly so that there's difference in between the pure publisher content and the native ad content, which is a paid content. The name of the sponsor or the destination site is clearly placed, and that's what ethically an advertiser should be doing. There are a lot of practices which is being observed where this particular information is held back. The sponsor is not talking about the destination, which is primarily incorrect on the ethical grounds, because then you're not telling the user that this is a paid content and a third-party content, right? So there are best practices, and then there are not good practices, which various marketers follow. All right. Yeah, so that's another example of how it is labeled: recommended by Outbrain, sponsored content by Taboola, so on and so forth. That brings us to custom content units. Customers, there is absolutely no limit, guys, on how much you could customize. There could be various sections on your website or your mobile website where you could customize, have an expandable native ad, have a video native ad running, streaming, which has a story related to the kind of content that you're reading. So I mean, this I don't have a real definition to. The sky's the limit. People and marketers, they customize to a great extent, and especially in mobile and the video category. It's been tremendous. Now, I think the next thing I'm going to do is compare, how the trends in between, and this I'm sure you'll find it somewhat interesting in terms of knowing what is the difference in between a conventional ad, banner ad marketing, and native ads, right? So please have a look at this chart. This is something which IPG Media Lab has done, interviewing around 5,000 participants, and what kind of behavior the users show when they go onto various publishers and looking at ads. So do they really look at banner ads and click and then buy products, or do they want some kind of a story tied around the product, like how you see on the TV commercials these days? They always try to weave a story around. I'm sure you would have seen a lot of the funny insurance ads, but I mean that's again somewhat where we arrive to native. So if you look at the chart on the left hand side, it says that the consumers looked at native ads 52% more frequently than banner ads. Why do they do that? They do it because there's a certain story which is attached to it. So now you're writing content about a particular brand, or what was the experience of a customer when he was holidaying in, let's say, a particular place, or if he was dining at a particular place. I'm sure a lot of you guys go on to you go to websites which review food and destinations, like Zomato and so many of them. So the ads that you see there in such websites, if you have a story attached to your ad, there's a higher probability that people or the users are going to click on it, because they have some kind of a correlation with the story, and they want to experience what it felt like for another person who spent money on that before they do it. So yeah, and the other metrics is so you're saying that 25% more consumers were measured to look at in-feed native ad placement. So as you see, both the affinity to click on a native ad versus a banner ad is always more. Even if you're talking about the stickiness of user, who's looking at the native ad is always higher. If you look at the chart right at the middle, it says native advertisements registered 9% higher lift for the brand affinity. So it clearly indicates that there's greater possibility. And the other thing that you can see from the chart on the right side, it says more of who people bought from a product from an advertiser, they personally identify with a particular brand. And then again, there's reference, so what it says is where you see that 32% and 90%. So let's say if I had bought a particular product, let's say a furniture from Pepper Fry, for example, and then I'm sharing that particular ad with one of my friends, there's a higher probability that he's going to have conviction that, Samir has bought it, so he might have put in his money with a lot of research. So there's highly probable that this guy goes and clicks on that particular share, and then of course converts as a user. So that's something which is interesting, guys. Not just native ads, but are you looking at shares? How is it being shared? What is the kind of genre which is looking at it? All that, right? I hope I have not put you guys to sleep till I just move on to the next. I'm showing you a couple of examples on how do really these native ads look like. Take a look at these examples on mobile platform where you can see Land Rover. So if you just peep in very carefully, you'll see promoted by Land Rover. You'll see sponsored by If you look on the example on the second left, where it says the new age of discovery, these are the kind of native ads. And if you can see, on the top is the auto news, and it is completely marrying the content. It's completely camouflaged, and the user, until unless you mention that red line that says promoted by Land Rover, if I was not a frequent user or from the ad world, I might not recognize it as a as an ad, but I would think it was something from the editorial, right? So, I mean, that's the beauty of the native ads. And if you move further, you can always see examples of the connected car. There's one talking about sponsored by Intel. Yeah, so they're talking about the tablet renaissance is inevitable, right? That's one. Just quickly moving on to the desktop examples. Pretty much similar as what you saw on mobile. It's just that the side of the ad, it gets more accessible. So take a look at the ones. So you've got a car ad, then you've got something on the bottom which talks about, you can see a family there. And in each case, what you can distinctly, make out is that there is absolutely no disparity in between how the website content looks and how the ad is placed in between. Because the moment you start to have that disparity, there's high probability that the user is going to feel that yes, he's being pushed to click on something, or maybe it's something alien which has come onto the website. So it's imperative that marketers keep in mind that there are absolute synergy in between the ad which you're looking at, I mean the native ad, and the content of your website, guys. So let me just move on to the next place, show you what it looks on a tablet environment. Almost as good as a mix of mobile, and let me tell you a little bit about my experience on how tablet has behaved. Tablet is one of the areas where there's a lot of story reading which has happened, because at Manorama Online, the company that I work for, we have so much of native content which is consumed through the tabs. And the tabs are perceived and in the right sense as high-end users, people with some kind of disposable income who have, income to spare on either luxury or high-end buys and spend some money. So, I mean, I've seen a lot of the large or the expensive category advertiser coming onto this space, which is tablet. And the traction is pretty good as compared to desktop. Tablet has been overall better. Let me just move on to the next one now. So now that we've spoken so much about native ads, how does it look, examples, and all of that, I think it's important that we also talk about how do you measure the success of a native ad, right? Because after so much work, if you don't exactly know as to how do we arrive at making conclusions on whether a piece or an article was successful, was it not? These are the metrics, guys, you're looking at. So one, time spent on the native content. Is the guy who's clicked on that content is really spending time reading it from the top till the bottom? Or if it is a video, native ad is the user looking at that video ad till the end of the ad, or has it just abandoned it right in the middle? So all of these things tell a lot of things. Attention minutes, it's obviously, attention minutes is pretty much similar as what you see as time spent. So it talks about the total attention per piece. When I say piece, it is one native ad, right? Most important, social shares, right? So it's one of the most important metrics, guys, that if you do deploy a native ad, it's important that you look at social shares, because you might have experienced that these shares have a snowball effect. And let's say if you're on Facebook and you liked a particular ad, like for example, I was going out to swim in the sea, and I was looking at an ad from Speedo, which I liked quite much, and I went out and shared it in my network. And trust me, guys, it had a very good effect, because all those people who were connected onto me had some connection with swimming. Either they had done it, they were aspiring to do it, and stuff like that. So, the relevance of your social shares, it really matters, and it kind of builds up onto, how your ad or your content travels through the space. And I think the next thing is obviously social following. So once you share, it is also important that we track how many of the people, how much of reading has happened on the shared content, and how many people have done that. And besides that, referral traffic, I think it is a clear indication Your analytics are going to tell you on how much referral traffic have you got, which could be anything at all, which could be Google, which could be any sort of analysis which we are using. So that referral traffic is one of the tough measures. Comments, yes, of course. Comments is something which which is very important to track when you're talking. So there could be negative comments also about your the content that you're posting. It's not a mandate that everyone is going to like something that you've done. Now on a retail ad, it could come back and say that your product is too expensive. You're doing the wrong promotion. So you both track it, and then you should have a measure to kind of handle that particular piece and come back to the user saying, this is why it is of this price, because otherwise your whole agenda of engaging the user is gone for a toss, right? So that's very important. Now, demographics, yes, of course, you're looking at demographics in which you're talking about what age category, who's looking at your ad, what is their geographical location, because you don't want to sell a thick fur jacket to a guy who's living out of Southeast Asia, right? So you'll be selling it to somebody who's either traveling to the mountains or the snowy areas. So it's very important that the demographics are kept in mind. Gender is one of the important factors one should look at, because the buying and the reading habits, obviously, they matter a lot. Page views, of course, they are as more and more people come and look at your ad, your page views obviously increase. And last but not the least, guys, click-through rate is something which is how many people have clicked on your ad is a clear indication of how things are moving for you, right? Now, these are a few slides. I will go slow on them. I want you to see them carefully. So it's almost it's a repetition of what I just I was talking about in the previous slide here. So it says, how do you measure the effectiveness of your native advertising, right? So what's important? One, traffic. How much traffic is coming onto that? What kind of user engagement? What are they doing with it? And what kind of time are they spending there? Sharing. How much sharing is happening? Sales, yes, it is a far-fetched metrics to look at, but yeah, obviously, brands would like to do that. How many of the sales converted from a native ad versus a banner ad? A lot of the people say we don't measure our native advertising. I don't believe it in the present world, because every publisher, or let's say a content generation, is looking at measuring the success of not only a native ad but also a regular ad, right? So that's basically the trend. These graphs that you see here, they are shared by INMA, INMA, which is the source of this particular graph, and it's very recent. It's in 2017 March. All right, so we talk about what are the opportunities. What are the biggest native advertising opportunities for your company. So what best can you do to make it a success? So if your content, the written content, is great, it's going to have a big impact. How's the layout? Does it really gel well with the environment of the rest of your content on the website or mobile website? That's essential. Video content, of course, because a lot of the consumption is happening out of video these days. So it's imperative that we keep a track of that. Multimedia story, infographics, what kind of releases, these are the other factors which impact it. But all in all, your content, your layout, the way it is spread, and of course video, because a lot of the people are consuming it on the viral space. So that's pretty important. All right, challenges. Now, I think until now, we have been talking all great things and singing all gaga about native advertising, but in the real world, example as what we have experienced as publishers, I directly have gone out and sold it to a lot of the advertisers who initially seem to like it, but what really stops them from doing a native ad is somewhat here. So explaining native ad, to advertisers, that's a tough job. There's a clear, you got to be very articulate when you explain on what is the difference in between a regular ad, and because there is a certain amount of generation of content which is involved, where your publisher is also involved in doing it along with you, it is important that the explanation goes well. Real stories, a lot of the advertisers may not want to tell real stories because real stories are always not great. So yeah, so that's one. You could always create a good real story. That's the other side of the advertising world. But yeah, I mean, that's something which is always a challenge. Pricing, people don't a lot of times see value in native ads, and then obviously you can see the rest of the factors, like you've got to train your sales team, which essentially happened in Manorama Online. In my case, there was somebody from the US flown here, and then we went kind of exchange ideas, and things worked out on the native front. So depending on how much how much is the publisher ready, and how much is the advertiser ready primarily to spend on it. Are they ready to spend time in creating effective strategies? Are they ready to get media agencies involved in making sure that everything goes well? Are they spending money there? And last but not the least, getting management buy-in. So that's although it shows at 8%, but I think that's the final call that makes all kinds of challenges coming down. Threats, and pretty similar. So when you go out to sell to an advertiser on the idea of native ad, there's a difference in what you try to explain, and how do they see it. So client understanding, if your client is not educated enough, I'm not saying educated in the sense that they are educated, but are you really able to educate them, is one of the challenges. The lack of engagement, obviously, from the readers, because if you have a good content, readers are going to stay there. Otherwise, there's a lot of bump off. Poor labeling, quality of your creative, complaints from readers, like I just mentioned in the previous example, that your product is overpriced, your service is not good, stuff like that. So that is a big threat, and you need to have a measure to tackle that, because if something negative comes up, we need to be equipped, have experts in our team to counter, not exactly counter, but to explain. Ad blocking is clearly a challenge, not just for native, but for any kind of an ad. So that's mostly it. But I'm gonna now wrap up with talking and showing you a little about global labeling trends. How do you? So when you look at if you look at a native ad, how do you see it labeled? So sponsor content. Whenever you see something written as sponsored content under a particular piece of content, you can be sure that it is a native ad, and that is the largest contributing category by far. And then, I mean, people want to stay wary of the third category, which is saying advertisement or paid content. They don't want to label it like that, but you'll always see sponsored content, recommended content for you, and that's how publishers are bringing it on to their users. That's how the advertisers want to be seen. So sponsor content should raise your your antennas next time you see it. There comes the global reality. A lot of us perceive native going to be it's an industry which is growing at a fast pace, but again, there are humongous challenges that come on the way. So half of the consumers do not know what is native advertising, which could work on the favor though. But yeah, there is also lack of awareness, where the user may not even go and click and read about your content. So, and 51% they say who know that it is a native ad, they are skeptical that what is the authenticity of this content. So again, it's a challenge. This is interesting. 3 out of 4 publishers offer some form of native advertising on their own. 90% of the publishers are either planning to have, or they already have native advertising. So all in all, it's a growing industry. And although I in this particular session, I do not want to share numbers because it's too much to digest at this time on where the industry trends are going. But what you can definitely know is 41% of the brands are using native advertising, and that's a good number to see. So I would wrap it up here, and maybe we talk more about this topic in the next webinar. I'm open to questions if you have any. One second, I'm just getting to see your questions. There seem to be a lot of them. I see Samir asking which formats of native ads work best: video, banner, text. That's a very relevant question, Samir. In whatever experience I had in the past looking at native ads, and doing native selling native ads is, if you specifically are talking about video, I think video in the particular. So a lot of it depends on what demographics or target audience you're talking about. But I think by far video has been one of the most engaging, because I'm sure you would have noticed a lot of videos going viral on the internet which talk about how did you celebrate your Mother's Day, what did you gift her, and then pops out let's say a health check or let's say a blood pressure check retail product. So videos are really engaging because, one, you are able to see them in 30 seconds or 45 seconds, and then you don't really have to engage in reading too much, which doesn't bore you. So yeah, but that doesn't say that those are not good to go for, because video comes at a cost. So but I'll rate video as a top. I see Lavish asking how can we put a native site on a shopping website. So Lavish, it typically depends on the website admin as far as what opportunities for monetization they have kept for for native advertising, and essentially if they are ready to create stories in which advertisers come over and say that I'm going to contribute content about my product, and you create a story saying that this is how the product is something relevant which you should be buying. I think that's a great marriage. You can always see users getting more attracted towards ads which have a particular story, and shopping websites in particular have an opportunity because something which is A, recommended, B, which has a story around it, and 3, which is shared, brings in a lot of confidence onto that particular product, right? So yeah, that's clearly an opportunity. All right, so I see another. Yes, so it's a question from Nitesh. He says, explain us effective. Yeah, great. So he wants to understand, how effective is a native ad campaign as compared to a high impact banner ad campaign. I think that's a great question, Nitesh. Because I will not say who wins here. Because if I say native ad is always better than a high impact banner ad campaign, I think that's not the right inference to make. But in the native environment, Nitesh, what really matters is, if there's, like I say, if there is some kind of an original content which you have, or a story that you have around a particular service or a product, or let's say anything at all, it builds more confidence for the users. Whereas a high impact banner ad may be something which is on your face. I would take it as, I don't know about the perception of the other users, but I, as a user, would not prefer it as compared to reading a content, because a high impact banner, it is something which is being forced onto my screen, right? So a lot of times I may like it depending on the creative, but on high probability as a mature consumer, I may not like it, right? And of course, the second fact is that the high impact banner ad, it comes at a cost. So a native ad is typically more preferred for a mature user, if I answered your question right. All right, so Swapnil says, as a publisher, where can we get this native ads? Any platforms for these kind of ads? See, Swapnil, if I get your question right, what you're trying to do here is, you want to build up a native space on your website, correct? So if you want to build up a native space, there are a lot of examples in which you can do that, and there are guidelines, of course, which you have to follow while you do that. And there's a whole lot of content which is residing on the internet, which you can research. Obviously, I'm always, you have my email. You can always write to me if you want, because out of that whole lot of content, there's so much that you have to filter to arrive at how do you go about doing the native ads, and what space do you take up from that, right? So it's more tactical, Swapnil. It's you have to basically go through a process of understanding all of that, right? Which I cannot explain over the webinar. Maybe that we connect offline into that. All right, I get another question, which is Vivek. So he says, how is native advertising different from platforms like Outbrain and Taboola? Vivek, it's again a good question to ask. So basically, what Outbrain and Taboola, these guys, they typically rely on content, and saying that how is native advertising different. So native advertising is a superset, right? In which, so if platforms like Outbrain and Taboola, they are subsets of native advertising. So there is content, there's an environment of content where native advertising exists. Who leverages this particular content is platforms like Outbrain and Taboola, who give you an opportunity to engage the user with your content, measure it, remarket it, reuse it, and make it a success, right? So Taboola and Outbrain are a smaller part of the entire native advertising world. Yes, they are successful platforms. There are a lot of other platforms like, Nativo. You've got so many of them. I can name at least 10 for you, but then I think it will always be recommended if you go and do a research and look at who are the top 15 guys in this space. And since you appear to be questioning from India, most of these platforms, Vivek, they are stationed outside the country. So you might want to go onto their website and see how different they are. So Samir says, what's your take on subliminal advertisement, which is another form of native? Samir, I think it's it's just it's branching out from the same topic. There is so much tactical that you can do when so subliminal is one of the part of the native. But if you really look at this kind of an advertising, I think it is very much test based. So you take, let's say, a target audience which is A, you test on that audience, then you take a similar pack of audience which is B, let's say another same size audience. So I think it is, you can't really discriminate or say that with conviction that a subliminal is going to work better than let's say a video, or let's say even a text or sponsored. So it's all mostly on a trial basis. Are we done? All right, guys. So thank you so much for taking time once again. Just a second. I just had Nitesh saying, thanks for your answer. What is the potential? Nitesh, we'll have to look into our next series. So stay plugged in. We're going to come up with another series of the same webinar where I'm going to really work hard and try and put some numbers for you guys, so that we all can learn how things are going to be in the next 3 to 5 years. Okay. All right, guys. Thanks again for your time. You've been a great audience. I would love to see you again in the next series of this webinar. Have a great day.